Rushanara.
Thank you, Sir David. It's a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, and I want to congratulate my honourable friend for her powerful speech and the other two speeches that have followed. And I too pay tribute to our dear friend Jo Cox, who is a powerful advocate for Syria and Syrian refugees. And Sir David, I want to declare an interest. I visited Lebanon in 2013 with international children's charity World Vision, and also Jordan with the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, and visited Syrian refugees during those visits. During the trip to Lebanon, I visited a number of informal refugee settlements and saw the extent of the crisis. And that was right at the beginning of the crisis, where things were unbearable, with hundreds of thousands of refugees fleeing to Lebanon and making up ultimately more than a quarter of that population. And recently we saw the challenges facing countries like Lebanon and, of course, Turkey and Jordan. And they have hosted the largest number of refugees, Syrian refugees, compared to other countries, including our own country, as my honourable friend pointed out. I saw firsthand the devastation of the crisis on people's lives, especially on children, and I will never forget the hundreds of children that were living in an informal settlement, makeshift tents on the outskirts of a town in Bekaa Valley. All the Palestinians who had fled decades ago from Palestine and to move to Syria, and then to be forced out of Syria during the war to Lebanon, to the Palestinian camp in Lebanon. And I will never forget the face of an elderly woman who'd been there since the 40s, and then the children of the successor generation who had fled from Syria and were put in the camps, and very overcrowded camp, Palestinian camp in Lebanon. So the plight of Syrian refugees is horrific. And alongside that, of course, the many Palestinians that were living in Syria and then forcibly displaced once again. Almost a decade has passed now since the conflict began, and we see no end in sight in terms of getting a peaceful settlement. And of course, the coronavirus pandemic has made the situation much worse. That's why, Sir David, it's vital that our government redoubles its effort to keep the pressure on those countries like Russia and China that are blocking peace, and they've been blocking efforts by the British government and the international community to bring an end to the conflict with various UN resolutions that were proposed by the UK government and other governments back in 2011, 12 and so on. The pandemic has meant that refugees face even greater risk. And of course, the spread of coronavirus is impossible to control in camps, not only in the context of camps that Syrian refugees live in, but also the many other camps, whether it's in Bangladesh or in other parts of the world where people have been forced out. That is why we need not only a resolution in terms of achieving peace, but we also need to provide greater assistance to those countries that are bearing the brunt when they have their own challenges. And I hope the Minister in his response can say more about what we're doing to reduce the risk of the spread of the virus in camps and provide more protection, because the UN appeals historically have been significantly underfunded over many years, and those countries are bearing the brunt of the crisis in terms of providing for those refugees. I want to finally turn to the issues around trying to get to an agreement to at least have a temporary peace while the negotiations go on. At the beginning of this crisis, the coronavirus crisis, the UN Secretary-General called for a global ceasefire. And we have to ensure that our government takes a leadership role in making that happen as we face a second wave, and potentially that could spread into refugee camps. And finally, I want to end by quoting the UN Secretary-General, who said at the beginning of the coronavirus crisis, "COVID-19 is a menace to the whole of humanity, and so the whole of humanity must fight back." These remarks and sentiments are more important than ever now, and especially as we consider the plight of Syrian refugees around different countries and around the globe, and of course the plight of other refugees around the world. And we've got to act together in order to protect refugees, but also in order to stop the conflicts that are going on both in Syria and elsewhere if we are to protect people's lives.
And